Stories don't define you. How you tell them will.
Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, your host and Chief Storymaker of Elkins Consulting. Many of my clients reach out to me because they're in transition. Their children are hitting milestone ages. They want more from their work. They're hitting a big number birthday. And they want to develop clarity about their natural strengths, what their next adventure might look like. In this series, you'll hear me ask my guests questions to dig deeply into the stories that shaped their lives, stories that uncover patterns and may unveil insights into dissatisfaction, and also where their strengths lie and where they've found and continue to find joy. This podcast's intention is to have listeners think of their own related stories and how they tell them, discovering the internal messages that are limiting their success, and discovering how to shift their stories so they become positive life lessons to move them forward. If you're curious about what it would be like to work with me, visit elkinsconsulting.com and schedule a one-time 90-minute StrengthsFinder session. Well, I am so honored today to be interviewing Terre Roche from the band The Roches, from the 70s and 80s, and now doing other kinds of music. My friend Jeff Furman introduced us, and I'm so grateful. Terre, thank you so much for joining me on Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Tell Them Will.
Yes, well, thanks for inviting me, Sarah. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, it was so fun interviewing Jeff and hearing about his musical connections, because that wasn't the main theme of our conversation. It was about being a child of Holocaust survivors. But because there was the musical connection, he jumped right in because he knows that I'm also a musician and just felt compelled to introduce me to you. And I'm so glad he did.
Well, it was very interesting for me to hear your interview with Jeff because, I know Jeff from years ago. I think he may have either written a story about the Roches or interviewed us or something, And so over the years, we connect like on Facebook and stuff. And I've always thought of Jeff as a music writer, and he mentioned in your podcast that he wrote for the Bergen Record, which is, we grew up in Bergen County in New Jersey. So I thought nobody's ever heard of that newspaper, and it wasn't until I heard your podcast, your interview with Jeff, that I realized that what he did for a living.
Isn't that funny?
It was fascinating. His whole thing, and how he came about working with the people in the army and stuff. It was just, I wrote to him yesterday. I just said, this is amazing. I've known Jeff peripherally for many, many years and never knew what he did.
Well, isn't that funny? I think that's pretty common, actually, when we know somebody for so long. One of my best friends once told me, well, you can't be a prophet in your own town. And I think it's because we think we know people. And there's always some aspect of them that is a surprise to us, even 20, 30, 50 years later.
Yes.
So I let you know in the email that we exchanged about you being a guest on the podcast that I like to start the podcast by asking my guests to share something about themselves that most people wouldn't know about them, something that's not on their bio or their resume. And in your case, your Wikipedia page. So what do you think? Do you have something to share with us?
Yeah, sure, I do. Yeah. Well, there's many things, but the one that came to mind was that I don't think most people would know this about me, and that is that I spent my 18th birthday, which was in 1971, in Spearfish Canyon, South Dakota. And it was the day before Easter Sunday. It was my birthday's on April 10th, and that year Easter was on April 11th. And sometimes it would fall on my birthday, having a birthday in that place there. And then, so my sister Maggie and I, we were on this tour, and we were teenagers. We had been hired to play at college campuses, and we stopped for the night in, Spearfish Canyon, and that was my 18th birthday. And the next day, we went to Catholic Mass. We were raised Catholic, and that's the last time I've been to Easter Mass.
It was on your 18th birthday, the day after.
Yes. So that's something most people probably would not know about me.
That's great. Well, it sounds like you kind of have a vision in your head about that motel that you stayed in Spearfish Canyon. What was that like?
Well, it was like, as you say, a motel. It was just a little one of those everything's on one floor type motel. I remember just, we had never really been anywhere. Maggie and I got hired to go on tour around the country to college campuses. I was 17, she was 18, and that would have been my senior year of high school. But we got this offer. We had this duo, the two of us,
sure.
And we got this offer to go all over the country. An agency out of New York sent people. So, like, for example, the college in Missoula, where we were on our way to, the college would sign up with this agency, and the agency would send various acts, and it was billed as like national acts are coming, so once a month in the student union at the college, there would be an act that came from this agency in New York. So at the time, of course, there was no internet. There was there was not much communication between someone in Montana and someone in New York City, so we were very exotic, to be showing up playing in the student union from New York. But then the places we were going were very exotic to us because we had never been anywhere outside of the New York area. So traveling across the West was just, that was
mind-blowing.
So exciting.
The
mind-blowing
vistas and the nothingness between towns, miles and miles, and not seeing anything.
And the breakfasts. I remember the breakfast would be different in Michigan as it would be in South Dakota or in Montana. Or then when you went down south, you'd have a different kind of a breakfast down there. They'd have hash browns there, but they had home fries up in Montana, but meanwhile, all of it was new to us.
Wow.
So, you can imagine. And at one point, I remember, because we did this for 2 years, we would be out for like 6 weeks, and then we would be back home, and I would go to the high school and hand in my homework so that I could graduate. I had to take the exam.
Of course.
But it was just the most amazing adventure, really. When I look back on it now, I think, wow, because at one point I was able to draw a picture for memory of the United States, all the states where they were.
Wow.
And, from going back and forth, and then realizing, wow, this state has a border with that state, has a border with that state. And just all the people that we met, were so, it was so interesting just to see. The first place they sent us was a Fargo, North Dakota.
Oh, dear.
And we had never been outside of New York,
Oh my gosh,
Fargo. And I remember we were like mesmerized with the cowboy boots and the cowboy hats. We thought, no, wait a minute.
That's just in
People
the
actually
movies.
wear these things.
It's like John Wayne just walked out of your movie and into your life.
Yeah,
Wow.
right.
So I would love to come back. I have this vision of you going to some random little tiny Catholic
Yeah.
mass in Spearfish Canyon, South Dakota. Like what? First of all, how would you find that? And what was it like walking in? I'm sure everybody was staring at you because Spearfish Canyon now is tiny. I can't imagine how much smaller it was in 1971.
Yeah, well, we didn't really know where we were. We had a map and we were on our way to Missoula, Montana, and we were coming from I believe this particular leg of the tour, we were coming from South Carolina,
Wow.
Lumberton, South Carolina. And so this was we had a big, long drive, and we used to love to drive these big, long drives. So it probably took us a week or whatever to get there. And so Spearfish Canyon was just the stop on the map when it came time to stop. It's like, oh, I had the map. Maggie did all the driving, my sister, and I'd look and I'd say, well, how about this? Let's plan to stop at this place. So we had no idea
That's
what it was.
hilarious. So what was it
Yeah.
like walking into that church for the very last time?
Actually, that was not particularly intentional. Looking back on it, I realized that it was the last time that I went to Easter Mass. But, at that time, it just seemed like a good thing to do, like it was, and there was nothing about the church that was that different, except for we'd never seen Easter Mass where people had cowboy boots and cowboy hats. That was strange.
Oh my gosh. That just makes me laugh because I remember when we moved to Los Angeles from Colorado. So I was born in Washington, D.C. And then when my sister was born 5 years later, we were living in Northern Virginia, moved to Denver for a couple of years and didn't get highly involved with the Jewish community where we lived. But then we moved to L.A. and we got very involved in the synagogue that we went to there. And I remember going to the big high holy days, they're in the fall. They're Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur for the Jewish people. These are like the Christmas and Easter, right? And I remember when we would go to these in Los Angeles, women were just dressed to the nines. This was the Easter Sunday for the Jewish people. And they would have these very fancy clothes on and everyone just dressed up. And then I remember moving to Colorado Springs, where they had just one synagogue at the time. And it was a Reform synagogue, which is the least of the religious practicing. They still practice, but it's just less rigid. And there were people in jeans and T-shirts. And I was shocked. I remember thinking how weird that was, that it was okay. And I'm looking at my mom like, I could have worn jeans? Because, of course, she'd made us dress up. And she just looked at me like, nope. We will never wear jeans to the High Holy Day services, just so that you know, that's not ever going to be us. But I remember being shocked by it as a preteen, seeing that. So you must have been beside yourself. Oh my gosh, cowboy hats in church?
Well, yeah, that's not my biggest memory of Spearfish. Interestingly, about a year and a half ago, I did a gig in New York in a club, a solo gig in a small club. And these people, there was sort of a bar at the back of the room, and these people were kind of sitting on the bar, about 4 people. And when the gig was over with, I went out and was talking to people in the audience, and I went up to them and I said, hi, and where are you from? And they said, Spearfish, South Dakota.
No. Oh, that's awesome.
And you can imagine their surprise when I said, "Oh yeah, Spearfish."
I spent my
I know
18th
Spearfish.
birthday there. Oh my gosh. Were they in cowboy hats in New York City?
They didn't. I don't think so, but they were in New York for a week, and the guy was a big fan of the Roaches, and so he was saying to me that I guess he had heard I was playing in that little club, and so he asked me, would you consider coming out to Spearfish to play, And I said, well, I'm not really playing that much anymore. No, he said, I'll set the whole thing up and I'll promote it and I'll tell everybody in Spearfish who you are, And I said, I don't think the Roaches are a big name in Spearfish, but,
Oh my gosh, such a small
we had a couple
world.
email exchanges, about that, but it never wound up happening.
That is so funny. Well, of course, then we had 2020 thrown right into the middle of that, which changed a lot of things around the world. But wow,
Right.
That's hilarious. I love small world stories like that. When you have that very strange connection. And I think part of what I love about them is that they won't happen unless we ask the right questions. So the fact that you asked, oh, where did you knew that they weren't from New York City? I mean, they stood out for sure. Right. I know I stand out being this Montana girl when I go to big cities. I know that I don't match what people usually see in those cities. So your effort to connect with them, to bring them in to the music more fully, which I know you do, actually unlocked this beautiful small world story.
Yeah. It was really fun, to just kind of, I could see that they were completely surprised. That was the last thing they expected, was that I would say I had been to Spearfish Canyon.
I love that.
Yeah.
Wow. So that actually leads me to kind of take this in another direction. Because you traveled so much and you did these across the country trips for 2 years, were there other small world stories that when you think about now, you those are the ones that pop into your head, where you ran into somebody you knew or something interesting like that?
From the touring around, you mean?
Well, just in general, I would think somebody who connects the way you do probably has some really good small world stories. I know people who love people, who are curious humans about other humans, they always have the best stories because they ask the best questions. And I could see something popped into your head.
Well, actually, first of all, I'm a real storyteller. I mean, I teach guitar at this point and songwriting. And, I constantly, in trying to get a point across, some musical point that someone's working on, there's always something that I can remember from my own experience, because, I've had such a lot of years of doing music since I was 17, so there's lots of stories. And I would have to say that I'm not somebody that had the desire as a child to be a musician or a singer or a performer at all. Like most of the people I know that do this for a living, they talk about, oh my God, I wanted to be this when I was 6 or 7 or 9 or 10. I did not. My sister Maggie and I, we learned to play the guitar off the TV. There was a TV show, How to Play Folk Guitar, and she immediately started writing her own songs. And so she would teach them to me. Now, I was 11, she was 12.
Wow.
And, and so she would sort of, and we were always bickering with each other. We were always fighting and, but somehow she got me to do these songs with her. And the thing is, she could sing harmonies. I couldn't sing harmonies. So she would she needed me to sing the melody.
The melody.
And play the guitar. So our very first gig was our dad took one of the songs that we had learned off the TV and turned it into a campaign ditty for the local candidates, because he had a friend who was part of the Democratic Club, and this was a Republican town, and my parents were Democrats in the middle of this Republican thing. So that was our first gig. I was 12, Maggie was 13, and we had this little 3 songs that we did about the candidates,
So you changed the lyrics to be about the candidates.
Yeah. You want me to play it for you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, hold on one second. I just have to get the guitar. Okay. So the song, you might know this song, actually. Do you know the song, The Midnight Special?
Yes, of course. Absolutely.
Right. So, like, the Midnight Special, shine a light on me. So my father, he wrote these words. So the guys that were running for the local council, there was a guy named Jules Adler, Bob Graham, and Harold Ford, right? They were the 3 guys, local people in our town. So my father wrote these words, and we were invited to sing these songs at a fundraiser at the VFW hall, right? So that was our first performance, was that. So it was like, did you ever meet Adler and Graham and Ford? They're running for council and they won't be ignored. Say hello to Bob Graham, he's your kind of man. And when you see him on the council, you're gonna be glad he ran. That's as much as I remember of it.
Oh my gosh, I love that. I can't believe you remember that from so long. Well, I guess the Midnight Special, but the lyrics, wow.
Well, the thing is, Sarah, is that what happened was that there was a state senator at that VFW show, and then he invited us to come and sing for his campaign, right? So then the governor got wind of us with the campaign songs. And so we wound up being able to, get out of school. They'd come and get us and they'd say, the governor's doing an event, in this town, and they'd like you to come and, sing the campaign songs. Yeah. And that was like our first gigs, so. And I must say, I think that between that and getting to go on tour and leave high school, I would say my main motivation for doing music at that point was that I got to get out of school and go have these adventures, Oh,
I hear you. I would definitely have taken that up as well. I was not a big fan of school.
Yeah. Whereas Maggie, on the other hand, she started writing songs, and our little repertoire that we had, she wrote all the songs. And she was more like, she was really passionate about doing this. I was more like, dragging your little sister along, kind of
Sure,
thing.
I'll go if I don't have to go to school.
Yeah, yeah. And also traveling around and meeting people and, having these, going to these places, exotic places like Montana.
So I have to ask, did you, you said you bickered because siblings bicker, especially sisters. I mean, they just do. My boys bickered when they were younger. But what was amazing was they would be bickering like crazy. It would be driving me up the wall. But as soon as we got in the car for a road trip, they were like tight. They'd be sharing everything. They'd be polite to each other. It could be literally seconds before they get in the car and I'm hearing them, neat, neat, neat. Then they get in the car and, Jacob, do you want to try this candy that I have? And, oh,
Wow.
Matt, do you want to try this game that I'm playing? It was the weirdest thing. But when we traveled together, there was some bickering at certain points, but in general. So what was it like with your sister? I mean, did you find some peace there, or was it constant friction?
You mean when we were on the road?
Yeah.
Oh, no. By then, I was 17, she was 18, and we had moved into an apartment. We were subletting an apartment in the village that my father had a friend who was subletting his apartment for the summer. And so we would go over like to the bitter end and over, to the
Right.
clubs and
That's
play
where Jeff said he saw you,
what they now
the bitter
call,
end.
yeah. So that's where we were discovered by this agency playing at the bitter end, and they came backstage and said, "Oh, we'd like to send you on tour." And I thought, well, I have got to go back and go to school, high school, and finish high school. And so I thought, well, nobody's going to let me do that, But my father brought me down to the high school, and we met with the principal and we met with all the teachers, and they worked this thing out that I could do all my homework and take all the exams and,
So your dad
go on
supported
this
this.
tour.
How did your mom feel about
Yeah.
it?
She was more apprehensive because she felt that I was too young, and so, but by the time Maggie and I were doing this, now all of a sudden we are launched out into the world. We were not bickering and fighting with each other then. It was almost like we got unusually close.
Mm-hmm.
We became like this unit.
Really tight. Right.
Really, really close, because we were traveling around as two girls, traveling all around by themselves. So we had to, it was kind of like we didn't know anybody in these places we were going.
Right. And for safety
So
reasons alone.
We had to get.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. So tell me about when you'd finish these tours and suddenly you'd be apart for a little while. Did that
apart?
Yeah. Were you ever apart after the tours? Like, well, did you both go back to the apartment? Did you go back and live back home?
Well, at first, the first year of this, when I was supposedly in high school, we would go back to our parents' house. Mm-hmm. The first year, and then eventually we did move into the city and live in an apartment in the city. But we were always together. It wasn't like, okay, you go your separate ways. We were just bonded in this way that I've never seen anything like it, really, Yeah.
Where is she now?
My sister Maggie died in 2017.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I didn't even have that in my notes. Wow.
Yeah. But someone 2 years ago sent me a recording of the two of us, just the two of us. We went on to make a record that was produced by Paul Simon, and he took us under his wing, and we created this record, which is called Seductive Reasoning, that's a record that has kind of a bit of a cult following. And so someone sent me these recordings, live recordings of what we were doing, the two of us. And I'm in the process of putting together a project to release the live recordings. But I've also gone back and interviewed about 19 different people who, some of the people met us when we were on this tour. Some of them worked with us on the record, Seductive Reasoning,
Wow.
We did an interview with Paul Simon about how we wound up, in his circle there. And so I'm looking we're actually presenting this, making a proposal, presenting this project to Audible, because we would like to make it into an Audible book, because these interviews are fascinating. This thing happened 50 years ago. So,
wow, that's going to be amazing.
Right? I was able to track down the person who met us at the airport in Fargo, North Dakota. A fellow named Lee Hantho, who went on to have a whole life. Everybody that we worked with and met during that time period, who went on to have a whole life, But then there are younger people that were interviewed who were influenced by the record that we put out. Like Emily Salyers of the Indigo Girls. I did an interview with Emily.
Them.
Yeah, they're amazing.
What a great way to honor your sister's memory and legacy. Wow, that's so wonderful. I can't wait to learn more about that as it comes to fruition. I'm going to be one of the first to buy it for sure.
Yeah, I hope it happens. It's one of those things where people have to respond and take an interest. I was amazed to hear these recordings, and a friend of mine has done an amazing job of restoring them, because they were live recording,
right?
The
So
people,
sound quality.
Yeah.
I'm sitting here just thinking about what that's going to be and how amazing it'll be.
And so some of the recordings were actually done in the year 2000, because what we did was Maggie and I did a tour where we revisited these same songs. And it was amazing kind of remembering them, putting the arrangements back together, So all of this music is never been released before. And there's about 4 or 5 songs that have never been released, but the actual recordings, live recordings, have never been released, So
wow. So of all those songs, when you think of a theme song for that time in your life, what is that theme song?
Well, actually, there's a lot of them. If you might want to listen to the record Seductive Reasoning.
Oh, I will.
There's some amazing songs on there. There's one called Down the Dream that Maggie wrote. You get a flavor with that album. You sort of get a flavor of us traveling around, but in a weird way. I don't want to say too much about it, because music, it's like there. I saw a great quote the other day, and it was by Martin Mull. It said, "Talking about music is like dancing about architecture."
Martin Mull, of course. Oh, great. Well, I have one more question for you that will probably bring this full circle in some way. You started playing music kind of accidentally at 10, 11, 12 years old.
Yeah.
Accidentally fell into a tour at 17. When you think about the music that you listened to, not necessarily that you were writing or performing, and you think about a soundtrack for it that's not your own music, what is that?
That would be the AM radio from the 60s, from the 1960s into the early 1970s or half of the 1970s. And also the singing in the choir in the Catholic school.
Oh,
I think that's where we learned how to hear
harmonize
harmonies
and
and things.
listen. So is there a particular song that just popped into your head when you think about the AM radio?
Well, we were really big Simon and Garfunkel fans, and we had such a thing about Simon and Garfunkel. And so the way that we met Paul Simon was that someone told us he was teaching a class at NYU. And Maggie went to the building where the class was. And when he walked into the building, she went up and introduced herself. And he invited her to come back. You know, she said, I have a group with my sister. And he invited her to come back with me. And, you know, we were both sitting as he came into the building again. And obviously he didn't seem to remember. Oh yeah, you know, I told these people to come back. And so he took us into a classroom and we performed, you know, we played some of our songs, and then he invited us to join the class. And that's how we met Paul.
Wow. Your sister was a force.
She was a force, yes.
She knew what she
really
wanted,
was.
and she made things happen.
Yes. Yeah, I feel like our whole thing she was like the engine. I, you know, had really not a lot of ambition. If you had asked me, what do you want to be when you grow up? I would have said, well, I want to be work with animals. You know, I'd like to be a horse trainer, or I'd like to be a veterinarian, you know. Those were the kinds of things I thought. In my eighth grade yearbook, you know, when they put what you want to be when you grow up, it says, you know, Terry Roche, politician.
Oh my goodness. Well, and then there you were performing for all these politicians. So you were definitely influenced there.
Exactly. I was impressed with the governor and the senator and these people. And I thought, I want to be a politician like them.
Oh my goodness. I don't see that in you at all. You're far too kind.
Well, the world has, I mean, one thing I must say, just in closing, I guess, is that this experience of traveling around this country in 1970 and 71, I developed such a love for all of the different states. And I am heartbroken to see what today is like in terms of the divisiveness and the my side and your side. And it's like that podcast that you did with the woman who made the movie about listening.
Yeah,
I thought that was right on the money. You know, I haven't heard anyone change their mind in about 6 years about anything. And there's all this slinging of, I hate these people, I hate those people. And it's just heartbreaking to me, because I remember traveling around this country and just being so charmed by, you know, going down south to Louisiana. West Virginia was a main place that we went, Wisconsin, you know, Montana, up in New England. And I just developed a love for all the states and the different ways that people were, and the food, and we didn't have any trouble from anybody, you know?
Right. Yeah, it is heartbreaking. Well,
Yeah.
I'm optimistic more than hopeful, because hopeful, you know, indicates that I'm not doing anything. I'm optimistic that we will find ways to reconnect, and maybe it's through music. I know it's through food. I love feeding people.
Right.
And maybe it's through our
Yeah.
stories, which is also a big part of your work and my work and Jeff Furman's work. And
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Terry, I am so grateful for this time you're spending with me. I'm sitting here with this huge grin on my face for the last hour. And I'm in awe at this point for all that you've experienced and the heart with which you embrace what you do. So thank you for that and for spending this time.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Thanks for having me on, and send me a link to your music. I would love to hear your band.
I will definitely do that.
Are you ready to start your story portfolio so you have the right story ready to share when the opportunity presents itself? When you're ready to get started, my book, Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Tell Them Will, is available in all the regular places, and the audiobook version is available on Google Play and on my website, elkinsconsulting.com. As a special bonus for listeners, the audiobook includes 2 songs recorded by my band, Spare Change, in my living room in Montana. Also on my website is a free podcast interview checklist. It's available to download to make sure you make the most out of your next podcast interview. If you enjoyed this podcast, please feel free to rate the podcast and leave a review. And let me know that you've done it so I can thank you properly. Thank you.